Welcome to this series on harnessing the power of positive psychology. I'm Dr. Meg Boyer. I'm a counseling psychologist, a licensed psychotherapist, and for this series, your guide through some of the big ideas in positive psychology and how they might matter for you. Here's what I want this series to do. Introduce you to concepts from positive psych, but not in a here's a textbook definition kind of way, more in a here's how you might actually use this stuff in your own life kind of way. Things that can help you learn to lean into your strengths, set meaningful goals, and ideally build more of the kind of life you want to live. Since this is our very first episode, we should probably start with the basics. What is positive psychology? What isn't it? Where did it come from? And maybe most importantly, why should you care? So, what is positive psychology? Well, psychology writ large is the study of the human mind, but that big umbrella covers a lot. Cognitive psych, neuropsych, social psych, clinical psych. Positive psychology zooms in on one particular slice of all that, human well-being and flourishing. That word flourishing is doing a lot of work here, because positive psychology isn't just about, say, being happy or reducing stress. It's about the deeper stuff: purpose, values, resilience, compassion. Basically, all the elements that make life feel meaningful, the stuff that makes it feel worth living. And the truth is, humans have been wrestling with these questions forever. Positive psychologists often cite how the ancient Greek philosophers explored the concept of eudaimonia, their word for the good life, and how Eastern traditions gave us practices like mindfulness. Positive psychology didn't invent these ideas, it just helped make them a formal object of study. Now, part of the reason the field took shape is because for a long time, psychology was overwhelmingly focused on dysfunction. Through the first half of the 20th century, the focus was on what's broken, what's painful, what's wrong with the mind, and how do we fix it or cure it. That's the so-called disease model. And that's important, of course. Mental illness is real. Suffering is real. But in the 1950s and 60s, humanistic psychologists offered a new perspective. What if we broaden the lens to also study what makes us well, what makes us grow? Two humanistic psychologists in particular, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, are often recognized by positive psychologists as laying foundational roots for the field. Maslow, you've probably heard of him from his hierarchy of needs theory, actually coined the term positive psychology in his book Motivation and Personality. He proposed that psychologists look beyond dysfunction and disorder and towards self-actualization, which he described as the realization of one's full potential. Around the same time, Carl Rogers was pioneering person-centered therapy, which rejects the disease model and emphasizes authentic empathy, acceptance, and growth over pathology. That laid the groundwork. But positive psychology didn't really crystallize as its own field until the late 1990s, when Martin Seligman, elected president of the American Psychological Association at that time, made it the theme of his tenure. He argued that mental health is not just the absence of illness. He, alongside his colleague Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, famous for his concept of flow, proposed 3 pillars of positive psychology. Positive experiences, which focuses on understanding pleasurable emotions such as joy and states such as flow. Positive individual traits, which focuses on character strengths and virtues such as courage or integrity and how they might be developed. And positive institutions, which focuses on how institutions such as schools and communities can contribute to the well-being and encourage flourishing of both individuals and groups. Since then, the field has exploded. Positive psychology has grown from an underdog niche in need of championing to a thriving area of study and practice. But with that growth has come misconceptions. Today, let's take on 2 of the big ones. Myth 1. Positive psychology is about thinking positive. You've probably encountered this in the form of so-called toxic positivity. And if you've ever been told to look on the bright side when you're deep in the dark, or just be grateful for what you do have when feeling empty, you have experienced this toxic form of positivity and you know how that feels. That is, I cannot emphasize enough, not what positive psychology is about. Positive psychology is not an exclusive focus on the positive at the expense of or in denial of distress or dysfunction. Positive psych grew out of a need for balance and the recognition that the absence of suffering is not the same as the presence of well-being, but it's not about looking away from that suffering. It's a widening of the lens, an opening up to the full range of human emotion and experience, a welcoming into acknowledgement of the depth of your joy, the breadth of your curiosity, the stubbornness of your hope, the richness of your compassion. As Peterson and Park put it in their primer on positive psychology, the most basic assumption that positive psychology urges is that human goodness and excellence is as authentic as disease, disorder, and distress. As authentic, not more than, not instead of, just as real. Myth 2. Positive psychology is only for people who already feel good. That if you're struggling, it's not for you. And look, I get where this comes from. Maslow himself suggested in his hierarchy of needs that we will only focus on self-actualization once our more basic needs have been met. But the truth is, life is messy and struggle is inevitable. And it's often in those times that we most need the elements of positive psychology to help us even meet those needs. Think about it this way. Dr. Collie Connolly, a co-founder of Goal-Focused Positive Psychotherapy and one of my mentors during my doctoral program, uses this visual. Imagine two circles. One is filled with your struggles, your pain, your self-doubt, your hard circumstances. The other is filled with your well-being, your strengths, your compassion, your meaning. Now, our human instinct is often to try to shrink the struggles circle. Pain demands attention and can feel like an urgent problem to solve. But even if you could shrink that circle through just focusing there, that doesn't automatically grow your well-being circle. They're not opposites. And the idea of positive psychotherapy is we can work on both together. We can have room to be with the pain and also highlight hidden strengths, spark buried hope, cultivate emotions that might help us broaden our mindsets and build our resources. In other words, room for intentionally and effortfully growing our well-being. And as we grow that second circle, the well-being circle, our struggles may not vanish. They may not even shrink because some problems are not so easily solvable. But they may take up less space in the landscape of our lives. And we may have grown our feeling of capability that we can deal with our problems. In other words, our well-being circle is relatively larger. And here's the deeper point, that as we pour into our self-compassion and our self-strengths, we could expand our acceptance for and tolerance of our struggles and suffering and shadows. How much kinder might I be to those parts of myself I wish to reject, my human capacity for selfishness or harm or hate, if I'm also well acquainted with my capacity for generosity, for care, and for love. That's why positive psychology isn't just for the worried well. It has something for everyone. Let's find what it has for you. So that's our starting point. Positive psychology, not toxic positivity, not just for people who already feel great. Instead, it's a set of tools, perspectives, and practices that can help any of us, wherever we are, find ways to flourish. In the next episodes, we'll go concept by concept, what they mean, how they show up in the real world, and what you can actually do to bring them into your life now. Welcome again to the power of positive psychology. Let's get started.